The topic today is the Invoice Template Generator. We call that ITG. And this is a feature that we are going to be releasing in the next couple of versions of jBilling. It will be jBilling 4X, most probably not in jBilling 4, but jBilling 4.1. So we can expect this in the first quarter of 2015. Although we are already using it for some projects that are currently under implementation. So let's put this in context. The invoicing presentation is one relatively small yet very important step in a much larger context of many steps that a billing system needs to deal with. If we have a customer and then that customer has orders or subscriptions, and then those orders or subscriptions need to generate invoices, or maybe once, maybe periodically, and then those invoices need to be paid. And those are very simplified and basic steps. Each of these steps have a lot of complexity potentially and lots of they need a lot of flexibility. And there are many other steps. For example, what happens when someone doesn't pay? How do we go about doing some kind of dunning or aging process and so on? But just to put it in context, in between a customer subscribing to something, buying some products or plans, and paying, we need to generate those invoices. And that involves calculating the invoices, presenting them, and delivering them. So if we zoom in into that invoice part, the invoicing step, we can see that the invoice presentation is in between two very important parts. We know that the customer is in the system. We know that the customer has subscribed to a number of products or services. And then we need, at one point, to calculate that invoice. At that time, we're going to do many sub-steps. We're going to calculate taxes because we cannot calculate taxes before. We only can calculate taxes at the time of invoicing because those taxes can change. There might be special pricing rules that can only be applied at the time of invoicing. And, for example, percentage pricing typically needs to be calculated at the very end, meaning when we know all the charges that the invoice is going to have, then we can calculate percentages and have those invoice lines in place. So the calculation in jBilling is let's say a logical step. It's business logic that runs in a server and it saves data in the database. Nobody sees anything here. That's the calculation part. But then, of course, we need to present this in a way that the customer will be able to understand. And that's the invoice presentation step that we're focusing on today. The invoice presentation step is going to make all the difference if my calculations are perfect, but I do not show those numbers in a way that the customer can quickly understand and agree with those charges. I'm going to have difficulties later because the customer is going to call some hotline or some customer service and is going to drive up cost. The presentation also deals with how is that invoice going to be, which format is going to be presented on. So it could be PDF or HTML or just a text file or a text message in an email. There could be presentation formats that allow for a very rich presentation, a very rich invoice that has graphics, it has not just information, but maybe some marketing material as well. And others that could be super simple. Sometimes you subscribe to some services and you get a super basic email saying, we charge your credit card for your subscription is $30 and that's it. So, but each of them have their place in for different industries, different businesses. And last is in the invoicing part is the delivery. Okay, so we have that text, we have to send an email, or maybe we want an HTML email, or we want to it's a PDF file that we're going to then print in-house, so we need a big PDF file, or we're going to send an email with a simple text but a PDF attached. So we're just saying, here's your invoice, open the attachment. Or we might be able to send the big PDF file or some specific file with a format that is very very particular to a printing service, and then they will print it and deliver it in a way that it's outsourced. So these are the steps, and one big strength of jBilling is that we divide everything that relates to the billing workflow in many little steps, and those little steps we then can focus on, configure, or maybe swap a plugin that deals with that specific step. So in this case, for example, we have delivery of PDFs, delivery of invoices that is email, and it's just a simple text, or maybe we swap that plugin with something else and we get a big PDF file. And that is just an example of the flexibility that we have in jBilling by slicing the workflow of billing in many little steps and then architecting the system to deal with each step pretty much independently. Now, if we now focus in the presentation step specifically, we'll see that we have two options in jBilling to present an invoice. Presenting an invoice, as we said, it really feels like a report because we have data in the database and we have to display that data in a way that the user, in this case would be an end customer, will understand well what is it that we want to present. In this case, it's an invoice. So from jBilling 1, the way we dealt with invoice presentation is with Jasper reports. The invoice itself is just a report design that runs on Jasper reports. And that would allow us for complete flexibility because Jasper reports, it's a tool meant for displaying information in whatever way it will make the most sense for the user. The catch, though, is that it's a long process. Well, or it could be. If you want a medium complexity invoice, it could take a couple of weeks. If you want a complex invoice, it could take months. A couple of months, it's not impossible. So it comes with a cost. It could be expensive to produce this type of invoices. We have this in jBilling 1. We have a number of templates already in place, of course, so we don't need to start from scratch. And it might be a very good option for companies that are very specific with how they want to present those invoices, and they have the budget to deal with a significant effort. The way it works is that you use iReports. iReports is a tool of Jasper Reports. It's a graphic tool, and that allows you to visually manipulate the invoice design. It's pretty good, but it is agnostic to invoices. Although we want to always produce invoices, Jasper Report doesn't know. It's a generic reporting tool, and that's why the process is long, or there's more effort involved than we feel it should for just changing an invoice design. So for jBilling 4, we came up with a new way, which is the Invoice Template Generator. ITG, then, it's embedded in jBilling. It's definitely part of the interface that is in the UI. You don't need to go to another tool. It is flexible. You can, within an invoice, you can modify a lot of things, how it looks, how the data is presented, how much data, but it's not infinite the amount of flexibility. You are producing an invoice, and we make assumptions of what an invoice will have and what is it that it's not going to have. So there might be some corner cases of invoices that the ITG will not be able to do. And for that, we'll keep using native Jasper reports. However, for the 90% of invoices that you can use the ITG, it's very convenient and the productivity is very high. When changing something on an invoice, the logo, the colors, the address of the company, that then becomes a very simple step that anybody can do. While working with Jasper reports and iReports in particular, you need a technical person to do it. Probably a Java developer at times to be able to be effective. And then the results are slower to produce because iReports will not show you how the invoice will look with all the data as a test. It only shows the design. So the changing, deploying, and testing cycle, it's pretty lengthy. With ITG, it's really, really fast. So let's take a look to then an example of a Jasper report. So we are all on the same page. You can see that with Jasper reports, you are able to produce invoices that are very rich. This is an example. With Jasper reports, there's no limit to the amount of data or complexity or maybe subtotals that come from a variety of places or even calculations on the spot. Here in this is a nice invoice that one of our customers is using. You have subtotals and a summary page, then you have a more detailed explanation of why those charges are there, what taxes were not, what's not, and then usage like CDRs or events as well, listed with specific columns that make sense for this particular business. Not everybody wants to show the calling number and the call number. Sometimes events are not like that. Anyways, in this case, it makes total sense, and it's done with the first option. This actually was done using jBilling too. So we've used Jasper reports really for a long time. Now going back to, and I'm gonna set aside the first way, and now focus from now on simply ITG. So what is ITG in particular? Well, the goal was to be able to generate invoices and make those invoices look pretty good without a lot of effort and without having to involve technical people. Really, those were the requirements. You don't need to be a developer. You can start modifying an existing template with little training. Now, our training people would disagree with that, but that was the idea. We did not want, so there's two extremes, right? One is flexibility, but flexibility comes with certain levels of complexity, and on the other extreme, it's a lot of flexibility but more complexity. So we try to strike a good balance between simplicity and complexity, between not needing a lot of training or being able to get up and running with a design really fast, and on the other hand, being able to change things that otherwise only you would be stuck with an invoice that is forced on you. We wanted to be as flexible as possible and still someone without Java knowledge, without Jasper reports knowledge could deal with. You know, someone that knows how to use standard Office products could use the ITG. So that's what we try to do. So let's skip a few things. We have invoice templates, which are the basic unit for ITG, and those invoice templates, you can have many. You don't need to have just one. You can have many invoice templates, and those invoice templates you can then copy to that one template to maybe modify it and give it a try to something, and if it doesn't work, you did modify the one that now is in production. Or maybe some of your customers want a different or need a different invoice design. So we have a variety, the ability of having a variety of templates for a single company. However, a template obviously has to show dynamic content because it has to show data coming from the database, the customer information, the invoice lines of that specific invoice, and a number of other variables, while at the same time there's some static content like the logo of the company. It shows always the same, the address of the company, and so on. So there's dynamic and dynamic and static content all mixed in a template. And it's all within the UI of jBilling. We're going to see that very soon. So you click on configuration, and there's going to be the invoice templates configuration option, and from there you'll see all the templates, and then you can just select which one you want to edit or modify. Let's go take a look to this. I'm going to log into jBilling. So if I click on configuration and I go on invoice templates, I see all my templates. I have lots of templates here, lots of people playing with this. Then what I can do as well is assign a template to a specific customer or to a group of customers. So if I go to account types, this is how in jBilling 4 we have to categorize customers by account type. And I don't want to get a lot in what account types are, but really they give you a lot of flexibility on what kind of data a particular group of customers is going to have, potentially pricing for that group of customers, all sorts of things. One of those things is the what kind of a template for invoicing we're going to use. So you can see that the invoice template here shows me the same list that I had in my list from configuration invoice template. That's very handy. But let's go back to my templates. So these are all my templates. I don't need to use them all. Maybe some are for testing, who knows. I can modify any if I have the right privileges, which I do in this case. I select one, I can clone it. So basically that's a technical term of copy, but developers like cloning rather than copying. Maybe some of them have watched too much Star Wars. I can count myself as one of those. And then I can just edit or change a template. And then I see basically my workspace. I have 3 panes for my workplace here. One shows me all the sections, all the bits and parts that make this template. The middle one will show me the specifics of the one that I just selected. So now I see my logo attributes. And the right one just shows me an invoice. And this is the part I like the most, because I can see immediately how an invoice is going to look like when this invoice presentation template, this design of an invoice, is applied to the specific data of an invoice. So invoice ID 1611 is going to look like this. I don't have to wonder or deploy this or compile anything. which are those are all drawbacks of using just a report. I see immediately a quick preview. Now, you could argue that this is too small for me to get to every detail, and that's certainly true. But I can just quickly download my invoice and take a look to the real thing. So when I go here, I can quickly see my invoice as the customer is going to see it. No difference whatsoever. So I see the logo and I see all these static part, but then bill 2, it's a dynamic part. It comes from the database and it's exactly what the customer is going to see. It's a one-page, very simple invoice. Anytime I want, I can quickly go and edit whatever I want and see the results immediately. So if I want to take a look to maybe moving the jBilling logo a little bit to the right, I can say, well, let's put 20 pixels or spaces or units of computing space into this, to the left of my logo, because it is aligned to the top left of this section, which is the page header. So if I apply that, I already see immediately my little preview that the logo is a little bit to the right. Let's make something a little bit more exaggerated to make sure that it's happening. So you can see now it's certainly more to the right, because I'm adding space on the left of the logo. If I put 0, I go back to where I was before, and that really it's a big leap for designing quickly an invoice template. It is really productive. I think that it gives anybody the ability to change templates really fast. Then the same applies, of course, to the rest of the invoice. Say we change our address from this PO box, we change our PO box to 999, and instead of Ottawa being in Manitoba, it moves to Ontario. That would be a good thing. So I apply this, and that has changed, although you probably cannot see it. Let's give it a quick download just to see my new address. And you can see that we changed to this PO box, and Ottawa is no longer in Manitoba, it's in Ontario. So I have a lot of flexibility, but and also a lot of productivity. You might wonder, how much can I change here? Well, let's take a closer look to some of these sections. So this is the name of the template, right? And I can just change it. It just has the very basic that applies to the whole template. The name of it is internal, of course. It doesn't affect the actual how it looks, but the page format does, and how the margins of the actual document does, and if it's going to be portrait or landscape. So similar to that, I have then grouping elements that take many parts of an invoice and group them, and I might have something to change there or not, and subsections of it. So the page header, there's nothing to change. It's just a grouping element, but it's important because the page header is going to show in every page. And here is where I have the logo and the addresses and so on. See, there's a shadow of a box. This is for the background to look nice. And then I have, let's see, some sections here that have an expression. You see, it has I want to say invoice, but then I cannot just put invoice number 1 and leave it, because that would be static, and the invoice number should be dynamic. So in my template, I want to determine where it's going to go, but I don't want that to to change. I needed to change with each invoice. So I have here the invoice number parameter. If I click on available invoice parameters, you'll find more parameters, and eventually it's just a quick reference for all the parameters. So as you can see, you can right there put the company. If this is an invoice for companies, that then will assign to an account type that is just for corporate invoices. While in other cases, I might want a template just for B2C, which would not make sense to have the company. But I have a wide variety of data that would come from the database, really easy to use for me. Beyond that, I also have meta fields that I could use. You can see here that I could put a meta field directly on the invoice. So that means that I could create a new column basically in the database, or create a new meta field that applies to some types of customers, put something there, for example, the region, Northeast, West, South. I could put a region for my customers, and then I can display that region in my invoices. That's very powerful because I have flexibility on the data model, and also flexibility to show those additional data fields in my invoice without having to use Jasper reports or any complicated thing. I just use my expressions here. Now, a big difference between this tool and a tool that doesn't know about the invoices, like Jasper reports, is that I have sections that already know what is it that is going to what kind of data to show, for example, the invoice lines. So I have the invoice lines element here that is the ITG already knows, okay, here I just show all the lines of this invoice. And it doesn't mean that I don't have flexibility. I can change the columns that I want to show. Maybe I don't want to show the quantity. I just want to show the price on the total. So I save this, and now the quantity is not there anymore. You can see that it disappeared from the columns right here in my preview. Or maybe I want the quantity back, but I want to show some other formats for the money of the price, because this is not Canadian dollars, it's maybe pounds. So I have a lot of flexibility without having to start writing SQL queries, right? I don't care how exactly the data is coming from. I just want to show my invoice lines, and I want to be able to show them in the way I want. Maybe I want the color to change, and instead of being green, I want something on the blue side of things. So I change that, and I immediately see my changes. I can play with that without having to work a lot between my changes and seeing how it's going to look. And I can change the invoice as well, because I might have other invoices that have more invoice lines. See, this one has more invoice lines, and that might be important for me to check how things are going to look. Maybe an invoice that has a big quantity. Are those quantities going to look fine here? Or maybe I need more space, or I need to change the font. The font size is too big. Lots of flexibility within the invoice presentation domain. That's the key for the Invoice Template Generator feature. Now, you might be wondering how far we can go with an invoice, especially considering that invoices in the telco space could be significant, could be complicated, could have a lot of information, could be quite complex. Some of you might remember when the first iPhone was launched. It was only AT&T that was allowed to sell the iPhone 1. And the first month that the invoices were sent, many invoices were hundreds of pages long, because old cranky Amdocs billing system that AT&T uses needed a lot of work for invoice presentation, so much so that they didn't complete that. So it was showing every byte that you were using, it was added to the usage section of the invoice, which didn't make sense. You just want to know potentially every day how much data you use, or if you use more than 100 gigabytes in a session, then okay, I want a line for that. But all that invoice presentation, that's an invoice presentation problem. And not the calculation was correct, but the presentation was not. So we need flexibility, but we need productivity. We need both. Let's take a look to some other templates that are a little more complex. So I have this one here, and this template, it's a little bit more complex without being super complicated, but we have, let's download this invoice so we can take a closer look, literally. So we have an important message box here. Also, we have another box here as well. And we have more than one page because we have the calls and SMS messages. Well, I picked an invoice that doesn't have any. We'll find another one that it's a better example. But all in all, it is similar to the previous one, but it has more elements to it. And you can see that here that it has this mediation events part. That's important because it represents how much work you need to do to show CDRs. So I have a text box here with just a message. That's what I see in page 2. You see, I can see page 2 immediately, of course, and it has just this little header there. Now, when I click on event lines, this is a similar section to the invoice lines. It's a section where I just tell the ITG, just bring all those events directly on my invoice. And then you can start configuring how do you want that to show. Is it, what kind of font, what kind of size of the text, what the color of the sections, and of course the columns. Do you want the date and the duration of the charge? Sure, that sounds good. So I can save that here. And you can see that now I see a header right there. Although this invoice doesn't have any data for the to display. I really love this part of just being able to put an invoice here, change it, and immediately see, oh, I see my events. I can immediately test this same template, different data, different customer, immediately. Very flexible, very powerful. I can download this if I want to take a closer look. I'll do it again because I want to show you some additional functionality that comes with this section. So I have my first page and I have my second page with these charges. Now let's say that I want to show my product and also divide this between products, because I could have a product that is international calls and a product that is SMS messages. And I want to say, well, look, this is a call, and I want to group them. I want to first show the calls and then the SMS message, or vice versa. I don't want them mixed up. So when I click on Set up columns, I have this sorting criteria and grouping criteria. And I can also show the product name. So I can say, well, let's group by product and also show the product. Or maybe I don't need to show the product, because if I group them by product, that would be enough. I save, and then you can see that now I have subsections of my main section of events. Again, let's take a closer look. Typically, you don't need to download that often to see. You do a lot of work just using the preview, especially if you have a bigger screen. My notebook doesn't allow for that. And then you download to take a closer look once you've done many things, or like a final test, let's say. So you can see that now have international minutes. All these 4 events are international minutes. Local minutes are all these. And I have SMS messages that I have all these events for that. So now I go to 3 pages, and you see the different sections doing what they have to do, the header of the invoice and the footer of the invoice working fine. This feature is not in a version of jBilling yet. It is still under testing. It's what I'm using right now is in a beta version in a lab server of jBilling, and there's going to be usability improvements and of course bug fixing as well. And also I myself can learn a lot more about how to use the feature. And that's pretty much it. I have some other slides that will make me sure of covering everything. Although I try to cover everything directly in the presentation. So we have the sections and the page header and the page footer. This is how the invoice is going to look like. So we can wrap up the presentation with just a brief overview of what we saw. You saw already the header, and you saw the footer, and you saw the section that also has a header and a footer, and then a content. So we analyze how an invoice looks like and the typical elements of an invoice, and we went about creating sections that we know invoice will have. But of course, if you want the footer in some of your pages, but not other pages, that would be a very odd and strange requirement. But having been in billing for 10 years, I know that those things eventually happen. If you wanted some invoices with pages that have a footer and other pages that don't have a footer, then you need to use just a report directly. The ITG won't do. However, for the most part, the invoices do respect a basic layout, and that's where the ITG really excels, because you can change all those elements. You can change and add things and change how they look, even change what data is going to show up, add variables, add static text, add data from the database like CDRs, like lines of invoices, and still use the ITG, benefit from its productivity, and the benefit from being able to look quickly how any invoice would look like, and not need extensive training to use this. And with that, I will complete this webinar. Thank you everybody for joining.